especially for us, in Guyana at this pivotal moment when we are, inundated. There's all these expectations of oil and gas, many of them already being dashed, etc. So we're kind of at a pivotal level right now in the country in terms of extractive industries. So as Renata has said, the ESCAZU is the call name for this agreement, which is the regional agreement on access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. So Renata, oh, all right. So I'll just outline what I plan to do. So I'll generally introduce the agreement and highlight some of its articles. Then I'm going to try to indicate its links with a few other conventions of particular importance to Guyana and our wider Caribbean. And I'm hoping to signal the overarching context actually of Guyana's legally binding commitments under the ESCAZU related to a couple other conventions, all of which aim to protect and defend our environment and promote our people's participation and their rights as citizens within the whole context of sustainable development. So let's begin with some of it's a very long name, as you can see. ESCAZU is a long name, but importantly, it has keywords and concepts right in its title. So number one, it's regional, and it's particular to our own region of the world. It treats with access to information very substantially. It treats with public participation and the right to that substantially. Justice and access to justice under the agreement is an underlying platform of all the other rights in ESCAZU. It is specific to the environment, and it is specific to human rights and the rights of environmental defenders. So I was asked, why does ESCAZU protect environmental and human rights defenders? And what is this? Well, the answer is that our region, Latin America, the Caribbean, has the highest level of killings and murders of environmental and human rights defenders in the world. More than 1,700 environmental and human rights activists have been killed just in the last decade, from 2012 to 2021. Over 75% of these were killed in our region, Central and South America. Just over the last 3 years, between 2018 and 2020, over 25% of those killed were indigenous. Just last year, 200 people were killed at a rate of 4 persons per week. And researchers, there was a big study done recently, and they all say that the actual scale of violence and assassinations is much higher because there are many disappearances of people. Are they dead? Are they living? Are they jailed? Are they in a dark hole somewhere? Unknown. And researchers also believe that because of attempts to increase fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, etc., in the wake of the war in the Ukraine, land grabs will increase and rights defenders will come under even greater threats. This, I used the BBC, Al Jazeera, Global Witness, and a number of sources to just compile this kind of summary of why the killing of these human rights defenders are so high in our own region. Now, what is the actual status and a bit of the process very quickly? So ESCAZU was adopted in March of 2018 in Costa Rica. And ESCAZU is the name of the area where this treaty was first adopted, and hence the short name of ESCAZU. It was entered into force which means it was ratified by a certain percentage of the countries of the region in April of 2021, just last year. So it is very new. And once you sign, as Guyana has signed and ratified, you then become a state party to the agreement, which means you're then obligated as a country to carry out and to implement the tenets of the treaty. Now, just very quickly, which are the Latin American Caribbean nation states that have actually signed and ratified the ESCAZU? There are 33 countries in our region that are eligible, 33 actual states. 24 of these have signed, and 14 only, however, have ratified. But that was enough to bring it into force, to have it standing for enforcement. And there's a list of the countries there, the 14 of them. And as you can see, Guyana is right there. It's in alphabetical order. And you can see a number of our Caribbean neighbors also identified. Now, there are some notable absences in the ratification. So only 5 out of the 15 CARICOM countries have actually ratified, and thankfully Guyana is one. Notable absences in our own Caribbean CARICOM: Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, and Suriname. So the biggies have actually not signed on. 9 out of 19 Latin American countries have ratified. The biggest country of all, Brazil, has not under Bolsonaro, but it's expected that under new President Lula, it will ratify, sign and ratify. And there are a number of, again, big countries, including Costa Rica, where it was first introduced. I don't know why they haven't ratified. Peru, which is in the throes of a massive oil spill right now, and Guatemala, Paraguay, Honduras, etc. Colombia, thankfully, most recently ratified just last month of this year. And so it is hoped that, more will come on. And Colombia actually is a country in the region with the highest level of murders and killings of environmental rights defenders. So it's good that they have ratified. Now, what exactly does this ratification mean? So the ordinary meaning of ratification is that it's the official way to confirm or to formally validate something. And so you can sign under the UN system of agreements, you can sign, but it is only when you ratify, you officially confirm and validate the treaty that it has teeth. And we usually use the word ratification anyway to recognize laws, treaties, agreements, etc. Now, importantly and legally, once a country has ratified a UN agreement, it means that all the obligations therein are binding and are enforceable at the national level. And many legal minds and lawyers right here in Guyana, they're not understanding of this and they query it, but more of that later. So earlier this year on Earth Day, Mother Earth Day, which is April 22nd, 2022, there was a reaffirmation of the ESCAZU. The first conference of parties, states met 1 year later, in April of 2022, and they made a statement reaffirming that the ESCAZU agreement is a fundamental tool for ensuring a healthy environment for present and future generations. At that meeting, President Irfan Ali of Guyana made a very big declaration pledging Guyana's full support of and compliance with ESCAZU. This declaration was very well received, and his statement was carried globally and locally. Now, in August of this year, there was something really significant that happened, and that was a UN resolution at the level of the General Assembly, which is the highest body of the United Nations. And in August of this year, it passed a resolution recognizing the universal human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And this was actually in line with the ESCAZU agreement. But whereas ESCAZU is regional to our part of the world, at the UN General Assembly level, it now becomes global. And this fundamental human right on the environment, I think, stands us and planet Earth in very good stead globally. Now, coming back to whether ESCAZU is a binding treaty, and the answer is yes. Yes, it is. The ESCAZU is a binding treaty on environmental matters among the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And just to put in brackets, and now, of course, we have the UN resolution that resonates and amplifies this. It is also the only treaty in the world to date to include specific provisions to protect environmental rights defenders. Now, in doing the research for this little presentation, I came across something wonderful. A Caribbean judge, Justice Winston Anderson, who is a CCJ. He's a judge on the Caribbean Court of Justice. And I've read, and I would encourage everybody to read his public lecture given in 2020 on behalf of the CCJ to the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. Justice Anderson, just a little bit more about him, was the first Jamaican judge and the youngest judge ever appointed to the CCJ. He was appointed in 2011, and in 2012, he was appointed to UNEP's board. UNEP is the United Nations Environmental Program. So he was appointed to the UNEP's International Advisory Council for the advancement of justice, governance, and law for environmental sustainability. So it's good news that we have someone of Winston Anderson standing right here in the Caribbean to help bat for us as needed. Now, the whole of ESCAZU actually stands on the platform of Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. So in 1992, there was this earth-moving, earth-shaking, huge conference of the world held in Rio de Janeiro, and out of which was this declaration on environment and development. Jocelyn Dow and others were prominent there. Jocelyn actually helped negotiate language at Rio. We had a brilliant delegation. We were lauded. Guyana was lauded for its excellence and its participation and all of that. So from 1992 until now, this Rio Declaration is still so, in fact, increasingly valid. And what is Principle 10? Environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens. Nationally, this means that each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by all public authorities, including information on hazardous materials and activities in their communities, and the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. Very strong. And it also says that states have to encourage public awareness and make information widely available, and also to facilitate access to judicial and administrative proceedings for its citizens. So on ESCAZU itself, anyway, so that platform of Principle 10 is just resoundingly clear and so valid all through the ages. Now, ESCAZU itself, I'll go through a few of its articles and provisions. There are actually 26 articles in the whole ESCAZU, and it has a preamble and it has one annex. The annex is just the listing of the 33 countries of the region. Article 1 stands at the head and is very strong. It guarantees the ESCAZU objectives, which is the full and effective implementation in Latin America of 3, and Caribbean, of 3 access rights. 1, access to information. 2, public participation. 3, justice. And of course, it is all of this is for us to contribute to the ability of present and future generations to live in a healthy environment and to their right to sustainable development. Article 3 outlines the implementing principles. There's a list of them there, and they include, I'll highlight some: equality, transparency, maximum disclosure of information, maximum disclosure of information, accountability, intergenerational equity, and the preventive and precautionary principles. And preventive and precautionary principles are very, very well enshrined in our own Environmental Protection Agency Act, by the way. Moving on to Articles 5 and 6, these treat with environmental information. States have an obligation to ensure the public's right of access to environmental information in its position. And it is in accordance with the ESCAZU principle of maximum disclosure. Each party state must establish and designate an independent oversight mechanism to monitor and report on the flow of access to information. I'm not sure that we have any such thing in Guyana, but it's good to know. And this mechanism, this oversight mechanism, may be given powers to sanction any breaches in terms of the maximum disclosure principle. Article 7 guarantees the public's right to participate in environmental decision making. Public participation, it goes on to say, must be allowed from the early stages of decision making, not just these one-off meetings and so on, from the early stages of making any environmental decision affecting citizens of the country. That would include land use planning, where to put this, where not to put this, what to do on the land, policies, as well as the drafting of rules and regulations, which may have a significant impact on the environment. And we, the people, you and me and everybody, should be part of this. Public participation procedures also need to have reasonable timeframes to allow for sufficient and effective involvement. So again, not these little one-off meetings and you go and everybody, the people in charge speak for hours and then you have like a 10 or 20 minutes after, and you go there and you leave there and it's just like a show. You know, there's no process for continuing your participation as a citizen in these decisions. And it goes on to outline the quality and the type of public communication. Article 8, access to justice. The right of access to justice in environmental matters is guaranteed with due process. And this relates to rule of law, et cetera, and to rights, constitutional rights, and the rest of it. Access to justice must include the right to challenge and to appeal any decision related to access to environmental information and public participation. Therefore, the access to justice in ESCAZU, Principle Article 8, access to justice actually safeguards the other two access rights, information and public participation. Continuing with access to justice, Article 8, it says that we're supposed to have full access to the procedures of justice that must be effective, timely, transparent, and impartial, and that are not prohibitively expensive. That regular people, poor people, rural people, indigenous women, the rest of us working, we have the right to access to justice that is not expensive. There should be, and also interestingly, that it says there should be broad legal standing in relation to any environmental litigation, a broad legal standing for people to bring lawsuits or to challenge through the courts as needed. Special attention in this access to justice is to be given to vulnerable persons or groups. And the state parties, I love this one, to ESCAZU, are to establish support mechanisms, including free technical and legal assistance. And this is enshrined in Article 8.5. We should be able to have legal aid and all that kind of thing should we wish to challenge any breach in our rights and under the ESCAZU. Just to finish with the ESCAZU articles, 10 and 11 continue to support the 3 access rights, and they also emphasize capacity building, such as the training of civil servants and adequate resources to promote popular education and public awareness. The final set of articles, Articles 12 to 19, substantively highlight the institutional strengthening arrangements, which include a voluntary fund to support the ESCAZU implementation, a regular conference of parties of those countries that are implementing ESCAZU to have a secretariat set up, and a committee for the implementation and compliance with ESCAZU. And finally, Article 19 outlines procedures for settlement of disputes. And the rest of them are just the usual UN clauses and so forth. Now, Justice Anderson makes the case as follows for why the ESCAZU agreement matters so importantly to the Caribbean. And he says, 1, ESCAZU affirms and strengthens the region's commitment to respecting the environmental access rights of its citizens. 2, it promotes the adherence by the Caribbean to sustainable development. And 3, it challenges the Caribbean to undertake new paradigms in collaboration with each other and to make the necessary accommodations in its jurisprudence. That means in its legal frameworks in the service of, I can't read, but I think it probably means, says sustainable environment, sustainability. Now, the next little section, we're going to look at a few other of the key binding treaties and agreements that exist in Guyana and look at how they link with or amplify the ESCAZU. So to begin with, the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which is the foundation that guides CARICOM and its functioning. And this treaty was revised in 2001. And I'm going to highlight 2 articles. Article 226 declares that nothing in the treaty shall be construed as preventing the adoption or enforcement by any member state of measures relating to the conservation of natural resources or the preservation of the environment. And Justice Anderson interprets that this could include measures that relate to the environmental rights of individuals. Article 222 grants all persons the entitlement to bring proceedings before the Caribbean Court of Justice to enforce their rights. So quite important. Now, there's a lot of existing CARICOM instruments, and I'm just going to focus on the St. George's Declaration and a number of its principles therein, which actually are access rights. So to summarize, CARICOM member states have the obligation to take active transparency measures related to the status and information of natural resources, and to facilitate meaningful, informed participation of civil society and the private sector in environmental decision making. And to make the St. George's Declaration binding and bring it into legal force, there was a revised Treaty of Basse-Terre. Now, at the multilateral level of environmental agreements. So there are several of these, and they all stem from the Rio Earth Summit Declaration. So some of them are listed there. I'm just going to say that under the Paris Agreement, 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change, again, Jocelyn was there at that momentous agreement. And what is important under this the Paris Agreement is that every country is expected to produce nationally determined contributions towards action towards climate change. And these are to be recorded in a public registry. I know that in 2015, in Paris, our Guyana's nationally determined contributions were presented. And I'm not sure, if and when I know we have done a revised version of that, but I'm not familiar with it and have not been involved in it. And I don't believe that civil society has been sufficiently this time around involved in crafting and drafting and deciding on what would be our national contributions towards reducing and mitigating climate change and so forth. And we're supposed to have on a regular basis, coming back to access to information, it says that states must provide information necessary to publicly track progress made in implementing and achieving their NDCs. I am not sure what is going forward to Egypt. The same, the big global conference of the world on climate that is being held in Egypt next week. I'm in the dark with what Guyana is actually proposing. Now, to the last section is a quick look at some key agreements on environment and human health that amplify the ESCAZU. So there is a quite well-known convention on biodiversity. And again, you see in all of these conventions, treaties that Guyana has signed, it speaks all the time centrally about public participation. In the CBD, it specifically says public participation in environmental impact assessments. And the EPA is busy waiving many of them, but this is a right that has been there for a very long time under our CBD. It also mandates, well, information, and again, the development of educational and public awareness concerning conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity. There is then this wonderful Minamata Convention, which is specific to mercury and the gold mining industry. And the Minamata is a fairly new convention, 2013. Guyana has signed and ratified it, and it states information on the health and safety of humans and the environment shall not be regarded as confidential. Public information on mercury added products and their alternatives shall be made regularly available. So commissioners, I don't know when last, we had a bulletin or someone came and upgraded us nationally on our status of the Minamata and where are we in terms of eliminating or moving towards eliminating mercury and putting in place safer alternatives. Again, it's a lack of information. Now, I'm going to say a few words about Cartagena. The Cartagena Convention was a convention that was again specific to our region and to the Caribbean Sea in particular. It's a fairly old convention since 1986, but I think it's critically now with our offshore oil fields, I think increasingly important and so on. So because it is a regional legal agreement for the protection of the Caribbean Sea, and the convention was adopted in Cartagena, that's why it has its name, in Colombia, and so on. And Guyana has ratified all three protocols. We ratified all three protocols of the Cartagena in 2010. And these protocols it concerns oil spills. and the cooperation in combating oil spills in the wider Caribbean region. It specifically speaks about specially protected areas and wildlife, sometimes called SPAW, and this would include mangroves, the crustaceans, the crabs, and all those things. What is on the seabed, below the ocean, what is within the ocean, what is above the ocean. These are, and it would include the nurseries, the spawning grounds for our fish, the protection of the fish, and which is part of wildlife and so forth. And it also speaks about the pollution from land-based sources and activities. I would say that all of these are so crucially important for us now as we are on the edge of this oil boom and all the rest of it. The Secretariat for Cartagena, because it is regional, is also located right from the corner in Jamaica. And I think that pollution from land-based sources, because we have the offshore oil drills and we have the onshore facilities with all of these hazardous and polluting materials, including radioactivity and the rest of it, it seems to me that Cartagena becomes, I would say, central to us understanding what are the rights therein and what are the recourses to drawing upon it and its remedies in our current situation in Guyana. There is also the Basel, I think it's Basel Convention signed in Switzerland. And this is an interesting one because what is the convention? It is the control of transboundary movements of hazardous wastes and their disposal. And that was entered into force in 1992, the same year as Rio. And the overarching objective of this convention is to protect human health and the environment against adverse effects of hazardous waste. It came into being, interestingly, in response to a huge international outcry following in the 80s, when it was discovered that in Africa and in other countries of the developing world, industrial nations were sending toxic wastes and dumping them in these countries. And there was a big hue and cry. They tried to do it in Guyana too. I think some of you would remember Mr. Blue or Mr. Somebody, but we managed to get hold of it. We managed to know about it and managed to stop it in its tracks. Through the 70s and 80s, relating to this dumping of toxic waste, there was an increasing public resistance to this type of disposal of hazardous waste. And there was this lovely slogan, not in my backyard, not in my backyard, sometimes known as NIMBY. And the whole point of the Basel Convention was the UN's response to combating the toxic trade. Now, I know this has to do with transboundary movements, but I'm wondering if there is any opportunity in the Basel Convention that would give us some recourse to the offshore hazardous, all this waste and all this all this dreadful stuff that is directly related and comes up from the oil rigs every time they bring up oil. And then it comes across the ocean and it comes into our river like the Demerara River. And I'm just wondering, is there anything there or is it only to do at the greater international level? Nonetheless, it speaks very clearly about the dumping and disposal of hazardous wastes. And hazardous waste goes hand in hand, is part and parcel of the oil industry. Then there is Stockholm. The Stockholm Convention in 2004 is a global treaty that aims to protect human health and the environment. Notice the same words keep occurring in the conventions, from the effects of persistent organic pollutants, known as POPs. And these are powerful pesticides, and they also serve a range of industrial purposes. And again, because of the oil, what's going on in Guyana with the big oil boom, Lots of toxic chemicals are intrinsically related and are used and are dumped and are stored, in their onshore facilities. So again, I think this is interesting to look at in our current context. And these POPs, persistent organic pollutants, have four properties. Seriously, they are all highly toxic. They're persistent, which means they last for years or even decades and more before degrading into less dangerous forms. They're always dangerous, but over the years, decades and decades, some people say they're forever, they're lifelong, and so on. They also evaporate, and they can travel long distances through the air and through water. And four, they accumulate in fatty tissue, the fatty tissue of humans and of animals that humans eat. So this is a dangerous combination. There's a lot of these POPs, we believe, also being used in what are now these mega farms, these industrial level agricultural initiatives. I know that they're used in Santa Fe, in that big mega farm in the Rupununi, and so on. And there are hundreds of them. There was a list at one time called the Dirty Dozen, and so on. And I don't think we pay enough attention to these POPs in Guyana, and the way that they will increase, it is likely through oil and gas. Now, I want to end by looking at the wonderful, strong, our constitutions. And throughout the Caribbean, constitutions contain general provisions that can be used to support the obligations in ESCAZU, including in access to information laws. Because remember, Article 8 that talks about and requires access to justice in accordance with the guarantees of due process, etc. So in Guyana, we certainly have a lot of due process and rule of law under our constitution, one of the strongest in the region. So just 3 articles to illustrate this. Article 149J, everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to his or her health or well-being. Article 25 speaks of every citizen's duty to participate in activities designed to improve the environment and protect the health of the nation. And of course, our wonderful Article 13 that provides for citizens and their organizations, to wit, civil society, to be part of the social, economic, and political processes of decision-making by the state. So that's it in terms of ESCAZU and the way that I think several of the other conventions and treaties that Guyana has signed and ratified might be very useful to interconnect and interlink with, and basically strengthen our citizens' rights to participate in all that is going on right now in the extractive industries, because it is our fundamental right at both the global, the regional, and our local levels. And just to conclude, I'm not going to go through these because of time, but I'm leaving on the table some questions and comments, which maybe commissioners and others can read and reflect on in their own time, or that can be used for further discussion. So my list of first questions really, because as I was studying the ESCAZU and researching it and thinking about it and discussing it with others, these were some of the questions that kept coming into my own mind. And so I've shared them. I've shared them here from me to you. And I think just fundamentally, I just am not convinced. I do not believe, because I do not see it, the monitoring the monitoring of our extractive industries generally, apart from forestry, which has the best system, but and yet there's still, illegality and so on. But when it comes down to minerals, to mining of any kind, and of course oil and gas is a mineral, I don't know, where is the monitoring mechanism? Who is reporting? Who is verifying? MRV should become a standard part, as it is in forestry, with our mining extractive industries. Where is the public information? And I've been pressing this because we have trade unionists in our own commission, 3 of them. Do we have an oil and gas workers union? Is one going to blossom here? Because, Trinidad and Tobago, which is in a mess, but nonetheless, what they had was a very strong, professionally modern, proactive trade union called the Oil Workers Trade Union of Trinidad and Tobago. And that really helped make us stay against so much else that would have messed up Trinidad and Tobago. Just today in the Starboard News, there was a whole page or 2 pages of they interview regular citizens about the high cost of living. They all said the same thing. They quoted the same prices. Things are now $1,000, like milk that was $450 a few months ago. I mean, come on, a package of milk, one woman. Don't talk about eggs and things like that, sugar and so forth. And I have some these questionings continue, and I want to just say for our friends that are here, non-commissioners, that pre-COVID on March the 8th, the commission had a public we had a thing in the press where we were interviewed at NCN, and we stated several recommendations. This was in order to encourage the political parties. It was just before the elections, and to encourage before 2015, I think, I can't remember, but to encourage the parties to do what we normally do, which is to meet with us as the Women and Gender Equality Commission, because we have questions to ask them, and we also make recommendations to find common ground on women's rights and gender equality between these 2 warring parties. And we chose this public way of doing it. And one of the statements we made there was, the oil is ours, our patrimony. We own it. We are entitled to it, and to be fully informed, to shape and decide our destiny and protect human health and the environment for future generations. We made that big statement right there. And I think we also said that since women are more than 50% of the total population of Guyana, that the oil profits, such as they may be, 50% of all of it should go to all women in Guyana. And we put that there on the table. And then to conclude, these are a few other thoughts, I think a bit specific to the commission. What I am seeing and feeling happening and knowing happening here. And I ask a question: have women and women's organizations and the WGEC, for instance, been fully involved or consulted in climate change policies or in oil and gas development? Have rural women, local communities, indigenous peoples been consulted as outlined under the ESCAZU and prior to that within our own constitution? Is this really going on? Is it? And I leave you there. Thank you very much. Renata, I finished.
Yes, I heard you. Sorry.
So we can stop screen. Anyway, we'll just.
You have to stop sharing screen. Okay. But thank you very much. I think that was a very interesting presentation, and I'm certain persons on this call will have questions and comments. You certainly gave us a lot of food for thought, inclusive of the questions that you had at the end. And so I will open the floor for those who would have a comment or a question to put your hands up, or just to start. There's only 10 of us here, really. So please go forth. Commissioner Singh says it was a very good presentation.
Oh, thank you, Annie. Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you, Amanda. I think this is very interesting. And, you know, the thing about it is that the women are not very much informed. I'm speaking about Georgetown, the more central area, much less the indigenous areas, because we need to take it out. There's a lot in it that we can respond to. But then I was thinking that with all of the conventions and what it has to offer, I just hope that we won't be seen as anti-government, although they have signed on to these treaties. But for me, it's very good information to be shared here and in the, I always say hinterland areas, so that they would be well informed of their rights.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Patricia.
Okay, don't be shy.
So Renata, I'm just checking in with you. Has the WGC participated in the last, our nationally NDC determined, our national commitments on climate change? Was the WGC involved in any of these decisions over the past couple of years, by the way?
As far as I know, in terms of being consulted prior to us making a commitment, no.
Okay. So maybe that is something that we could recommend in the future, that as the Rights Commission on Women and Gender, that, basically we should be there.
I'd certainly make a note to do that.
And, I wanted to quote from what President Orfanali said. It was a pretty magnificent speech that he made, I think this year, in April, I think, of 2022. And we should try to find it, because he really did make a very enthusiastic speech about the ESCAZU. And maybe when the delegation meets him, Renata and sister commissioners, I think it's coming up soon. There's a date set, right, to meet the president. And maybe, some of this is something that we can maybe take to him, concerning ESCAZU and our citizens' rights. And, it's new. It's a new convention. And so it's probably useful for us to kind of publicize it and to inform people, so that, so we can, we can make A, informed decisions, and B, inform each other about what are our rights. We always say, we have so many rights in Guyana, and we don't stand up for it. And when I think of, let us say, CEDAW, that is part of the mandate of our commission, how many of those CEDAW rights are being honored in the breach? And yet, we don't really rev up enough, I think, about it nationally. And I think we have, as Justice Anderson says, we need to test some of these things in the court of public opinion, but also in the justice courts, because it is our right. And going to court don't mean you're anti-government or so. Sometimes it is to encourage our state and ourselves as citizens to do the right thing, because there it is laid out in the law, It's not, we shouldn't be thinking of this thing as anti-government, or that civil society is anti-government and environmentalists don't want development. These are all the tags that began in the early days, decades ago, and have now led to these environmental rights defenders being mercilessly assassinated just for standing up for their rights and their own land and this kind of thing. So,
yep. So it points to our political maturity as a nation when these things give
yeah.
us pause. When claiming or upholding our own rights gives us pause if it would look, in terms of how would it look to the government of the day. So any comments, final comments from anybody before we close the call, I guess?
May I come in to say something? Deputy Chair here.
Yes, ma'am. Please go
Oh,
ahead.
hello.
Good to
Hi,
know.
Cheryl. Hi.
Yes, I've been here. And thank you, Vanda, for information. My only disappointment is that so many commissioners were not on this call. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah. Very glad that you're here, though.
Excuse me, Renata, those of us not on the commission that are participating, can we participate in the conversation or we're just observing?
Yeah.
Of course.
For everybody who's on the call.
Well, may I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, I just have to kill my speaker a minute. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simone Mangle, Jolie, and I'm not in Guyana currently. Thank you for the opportunity to be here for this presentation, Vanda, which was really excellent and clear. And the opportunity to be among the commissioners. I think you have a sacred duty in Guyana, and I know many of you do this with a tremendous effort and very little support. I was wondering if I may say something today as a direct appeal to the Commission, because I do believe that the one arena where women are extremely underrepresented and there is a great injustice is when it comes to major decisions being made about our development that is profoundly affecting our environment. And just to address what Vanda presented on today, in a very concrete way. Four strands I'd like to draw to your attention. The first is climate change. Guyana, as you know, is vulnerable and we are already seeing the effects of droughts and floods. Women are the frontline sufferers from climate change. We are more vulnerable in many ways from our bodies as caregivers and as the poorest segments of society, especially among the poor. So if you look at, people talk all the time about climate change and we think it's this big airy fairy thing out there, but here are some facts. Just a 1 degree rise in temperature or half a degree rise in temperature or just a hot day predisposes women to preterm births, preeclampsia, low birth weights, perinatal mortality for young babies, stillbirths, and spontaneous abortion. And as the heat goes up, blood pressure and other kinds of illnesses increase. So there is a very profound link to the change in our environment and our abilities to reproduce and to do so in a healthy manner. That's one. The stress that comes on women when we have these climate events is far greater than what comes on men. Women are caregivers. Women are, after a flood, they're cleaning. They are most exposed to some of the worst aspects of contamination. They carry a greater burden to sanitize, to cook, to find clean water, to provide for their family, and they tend to go hungry so their children can be fed and their husbands. In situations of crisis, whether it's a flood or whether it's a drought, it's women in droughts who have to go fetch water. The labor time, the unpaid labor care that they're putting into their families is being multiplied at an enormous rate and a very silent rate. We are not seeing it. When we see the ads, the articles in our newspapers that this area had a flood, that area had a flood, we're not seeing what's happening to the women who live there. And most women are not landowners, so they don't even receive compensation. in the way that a landowner might be compensated for losses, which are never properly compensated to begin with. So that's the first thread that I would like to put on the table for us to think about as we talk about these environmental issues and environmental rights. It's that there is a disproportionate burden on women. And this is why it is so important that women do have an opportunity to examine what is being done to our lives by our elected leaders, by persons in public office, by the private sector in Guyana. Right now, the second strand I want to talk about is oil and gas. We have embraced oil and gas as if Guyana will not drown. Guyana will somehow, because we're doing oil and gas, we will not get worse storms. We're going to keep out the sea. We have given up on the idea that we are vulnerable and we must protect ourselves. We are culpable now, and we are racing to destroy the rest of the world. But I'm going to leave aside that moral issue and bring some concrete information to your attention. Offshore of Guyana, what is going on with the oil and gas drilling? There are two segments to it. The first is that there's exploration and then there's production. In the exploration, they often use these seismic guns. Now, those seismic guns, effectively what they're doing is they're blowing up our waters. They are emitting sonic bursts, and those sonic bursts, everything in the ocean, like the plankton that the fish feed on, that the whales feed on, those things are like a plastic bag. So if you just imagine a balloon and then you're vibrating it, it just bursts. So what they're actually doing is completely destroying our entire food chain. Guyana is the only country where these companies are operating that does not require an environmental impact assessment for these operations, for these seismic testing operations. Now, it should be required because our law requires it, but our EPA keeps waiving it. How does this really work? You basically have a gun going off every 10 seconds, a boom, 4 to 6 weeks straight in the water. No fish, nothing can be around that. And fish cannot swim away from that. This is being said all over in the news. This is just absurd. The whales, the animals, nobody can come near it. So our waters, our womb, the sea is being made barren. Every day, this indiscriminate allowing one after another of these seismic testing. And what you should know is that when the permissions are given, there is no consideration to the season of the year, to when the fishes are having their babies, to when the mammals are having their babies, nothing. We have this wonderful, beautiful ocean that you cannot see. You're seeing the brown, but you go beyond that, and there are whales and dolphins and all kinds of incredible life. And on where our food comes from, and it's all being destroyed. And we have come to this disgraceful place only 4 years into oil production, where we are saying to our people, we're going to make the fish in ponds. Can you think of what the gravity of that destruction is? And what does it mean for us? And what does it mean for the women? We talk all the time about the fishermen, the families, the wives, the daughters of fishermen who are now can't afford it. They have to go out and look for work. Those girls are in Regent Street. They're up in the bush prostituting themselves. Their mothers are looking for domestic work. There are whole families that are on the breadline. And they are suffering right now, and in a very tangible way that is linked to this airy-fairy environmental issue. And so it's not just what's happening to the resources that we have a sacred duty to pass on to our children and their children and the children after that. It's what's happening to the poorer segments of our families and also ourselves, because a middle-class family can't go and buy snapper anymore or banga Mary the way they used to. We simply are not earning for that. So that's the second strand. What is going on offshore and how that affects us and disproportionately affects women onshore. The third strand is what happens when all the waste is made offshore. They're drilling deep down into the earth, and deep a mile into the earth is radioactive. They're taking that waste up, they're putting them on ships, and they're bringing it to our neighborhoods. They're coming up the Demerara River, and the EPA is allowing these radioactive waste treatment facilities to be set up in the coastland in neighborhoods. The one in Houston is a walk away from the school. This is toxic waste. In the United States and Canada, these are what you call Superfund facilities. They take billions of dollars to clean up. You can't put them near someone's home. In Guyana, they're being indiscriminately dotted in communities across the coastland, first of all. And secondly, some of the testers that they use, which are the radioactive testers that they put to trace the oil for the studies and all of that they're doing offshore, they're setting up these facilities in homes. Somebody is renting somebody's house in a neighborhood and they're running a facility out of that. When we look at what is happening, you will see that it is women who are at the forefront, who are being thought of as if we are somehow these insane radicals that always want to complain. The women in COVID and their kids have to sleep literally one wall away. Who wants a child? Who wants to put their children there? And even if you're saying, go ahead and have an oil and gas industry, it does not have to be done in such a damaging and destructive way. Our coastland cannot bear economically or ecologically, or from a health perspective, the kinds of industry that are being cited on the coast. So that's the other strand. The final strand I want to draw your attention to is what this means. We in Guyana get all our water from an aquifer. There are actually 3 parts of the aquifer, but the majority of the water and the good quality water comes from an aquifer that stretches under the Wales estate, where our government wants to put a highly polluting industry, multi-industry complex. So it's not just that you're bringing in an oil and gas pipeline, you're firing a power plant. And that power plant, the intention, if you look at the Wales estate plans, is to support downstream manufacturing of plastics, etc. This is known as the nastiest, dirtiest business in the world, and nobody wants them. We want them, apparently. And where are we putting it? We're putting it above our water supply. And if you look at the EIA that's been produced, it says nothing will happen. Guyana sits 6 feet below sea level and our water table is very high. If you mess up the water table, and if you're trying to say to the people of Guyana that you will put down a massive natural gas facility plus a power plant, plus all of the downstream things, and you are not going to pollute the bodies of every man, woman, and child, then you can't be thinking that you're dealing with sentient beings. You must be sitting down with a bunch of wood carvings of citizens. Because that very act of putting that industry there will kill our water. So in 4 years, we have killed our fish. And in 6 years, we will kill our water. And we have to think how long it's going to take to kill ourselves out with the cancers, with all the illnesses. That power plant, again, it comes back to women. It is women who will be affected with the sulfur dioxide, the nitrous oxide in pregnancy. It is women who are caregivers of children. The asthma rates are going to skyrocket. And it is women's time, women's burden. The woman who cleans the school has to take out her money, turn around and carry her child to the doctor. These 4 areas that I point out to you, the whole issue of the airy-fairy climate change, what appears to be airy-fairy offshore stuff, what appears to be, a bunch of complaining people when it comes to the onshore toxic waste facilities, and the risk to our water and our lives and everything with the onshore oil and gas, power plant. All 4 of these things are fundamentally connected to women's role, reproductive role in society, women's rights, not only as individuals in charge of our bodies, which are more vulnerable, but our children's bodies and as caregivers for the elderly, and fundamentally as full human beings who have and ought to have a right, who have it and ought to be able to have a say in how and what we want our future to look like and our present to look like.
Simone, they have people with hands up. I think that was brilliant. I'm glad it's all being recorded.
Let me just close, Vanda, by saying I would like to call on the commission specifically to do a participatory review, a self-assessment with women in Guyana on where we stand with respect to environmental decision-making and the consequences. Thank you.
Yes, excellent recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank
Over
you.
to you,
And we
Renata.
recognize John Palmer.
Yes, I put a question in the chat on behalf of Janet Balkan, who unfortunately is conducting an examination and can't participate. My concern is, as you can read in the chat log, that when you have a non-functioning judiciary in Guyana, partly because neither of the main parties will confirm the appointments of either the Chief Justice or the Chancellor, then you have a judiciary which is reluctant to ever take the case on behalf of the citizens or to give judgments in accordance with the rule of law. So what are the options? And this is a question to you, Vanda, given this tremendous catalogue, which you've just read out of the various treaties to which Guyana is signed up. How can citizens of Guyana make use of these various treaties, which at the moment are sitting on the shelf, but not apparently used? And I have one suggestion, but I'd like to hear your response, Vanda, first.
Yes, well, John, thank you so much, and greetings to Janet. It's it's a very pertinent question. So I put somewhere in my presentation, I think in the questions I left on the table, that in my experience, there is very limited within the judiciary, the magistracy, within the justice system as such. There's hardly anyone who is trained or in their role, their training is not based in a human rights approach. I know the one person I know, well, there is Melinda Janke, who has worked with the commission, but the other person that I know is actually the acting Chief Justice, Roxanne George, who is a friend of the commission, and who paid herself to do a course maybe a decade ago in human rights jurisprudence. And so she has probably the best understanding at that high level of the judiciary, but generally you can't even find lawyers that have an understanding of human rights. And when you bring, as let us say a client, you bring a human rights or some of these conventions which are judiciable in our country, they're enforceable, they shy away from it. They keep telling you, no, it's not domestic law, but it's wrong-headed. And that is why I was glad for the man, the justice in Jamaica, Anderson, who is squarely positing that this thing, it's enforceable. It is part of your legal framework once you ratify, et cetera, et cetera. So, John, indeed, I think we're at a low level. I'm encouraging in my own little way. I'm sponsoring two young students, one who's gotten a scholarship to go to Trinidad to study, human rights, to do their law degree in human rights, because we need a lot more of it. Thank you. So, John, you wanted to make a recommendation. Hi, John, can you unmute? Sure. Renata, can you see?
I'm unmuted now. So my recommendation would be to follow the example of the Amerindian community of Chinese Landing, which took their case to an international forum because of the inability of the government agencies and the judiciary in Guyana to treat their case seriously. And the great advantage of going to the international forum is that the government of Guyana has to respond, and did so. And it's incredible. This is a very good example of, as Vanda has just said, the weaknesses within the Guyana system. So the response from the government of Guyana is almost laughably weak. And this is greatly strengthening to the Amerindian community in Chinese landing. They haven't resolved their problem, but they've certainly brought it to international attention. And this is, I think, going to be one way that you might improve the situation in Guyana. But I'm a foreigner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate that. And yes, indeed. And as you know, as the CCJ judge has said, you know, we can carry something of our own to the CCJ, because remember that this is a regional treaty particular to the Caribbean. And that's why I also try to quote Chaguaramas and different things, so that I think we don't have to, what's the word, exhaust all domestic judicial things. I think that we, again, we need to be advised, but I do believe that under the ESCAZU, we can in fact have a case listened to at the CCJ level. And I do agree that we have these international forums that we should explore in terms of getting our access to justice under the ESCAZU. So thanks for bringing that forward.
It's the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which took the Chinese landing case, and they said that notwithstanding the failure to exhaust domestic remedies, the situation in Guyana was such that the court system simply did not allow an appellant to exhaust those remedies, and therefore they would set that aside. And I think that's a very significant finding. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And John, last year, hundreds of civil society activists and organizations had a petition heard at the international, at the Inter-American Commission. And again, it was on extractive industries and human rights, and it was very well received. And I made to understand, and our commissioners, this is something that we should get ready for, that next year there will be, based on our petition that was heard, that yes, that a delegation from the Inter-American Commission, Human Rights Commission, is going to be in Guyana to follow up on some of the other things raised there. It was a Caribbean-wide petition, but the Guyana section of it featured gold mining as well as oil and gas. So we're taking a few steps, but indeed we need to rev up. Thank you.
Thank you. Floor recognizes Jocelyn.
Thanks, Renata. Just want to say a few things. I think that thanks for all the presentations, and I think the important nexus between John, Simone, and Vanda is that there has to be some ground truthing. All of these agreements are based on very noble aspirations that have come out of actual realities that people around the world have confronted. What is significant to me here in Guyana is that we're very good at signing on to all these agreements, but the tire never hits the road here, really. So if the Women's Commission, in my view, is serious about its mandate and serious about the health of women, which is the basis of should be the basis of a large part of your advocacy, whether it's against violence, it's against, you know, incursions into their bodies. I think that perhaps one of the ways in which you can take this forward is to create now a kind of Bill of Rights, or set up some precautionary principles that are pertinent to what is going on in Guyana. The whole idea of precautionary principles is that you should avoid anything that may do any harm, much as all of the things that we know here that are already doing harm and certainly will do much harm to the unborn and future generations. And as you said, so a lot of what created that very vocal and capable group throughout that generation or decade of conferences was the fact that women from around the world brought their experiences and realities together. We have it all here now in a microcosm. And commission perhaps should try and take the lead, including to deal with the absent judiciary, in my view, to how it is you are going to work in the public interest in a way that limits what is going on now and questions what is planned. And, there is no halfway house in this, in my view. You have to be guided by science and the realities of people like the fisher folk and what we know is happening in other areas around the country. What's happening in mining, what's happening everywhere. And for us to develop as women and with the role of the commission, who has presumably has some public status that the government might take seriously, is to develop this kind of bill of rights and demand the kind of have an action plan attached to it. Let's put gender on this oil agenda, and I think that if you could create some kind of popular vehicle where you could take in stories, you could disseminate the kind of information that Simone has been raising and disseminate the obligations of the state that we've entered into, that it would be a very useful thing to begin to raise consciousness on the real and present danger that we in Guyana are facing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You certainly made our agenda longer, but good going.
Renata, I see that.
If I may, Renata, it's not a question of making your agenda longer. It's prioritizing your agenda. What is the real and urgent danger that is confronting people in Guyana, women in particular? It's not only women, but it is particularly women. And I think that if the commission was to have a priority list or seek a priority list from the public, it may help to guide your work in a very definite way in this round. There is so much nepotism and patronage around here that it is hard work. But, you have a constitutional mandate, and I think it's important that you operationalize it, so to speak. Right.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I love this. Let's put gender on the oil agenda. And yes, I do believe that the commission can rise to the occasion. And as Patricia Singh, who spoke earlier, who is the Indigenous Commission's representative on the Women's Commission, and she pointed out from the beginning, there is a complete lack of real consultation with any of the Indigenous and rural communities. And that has been said over and over. The deputy chair of the former NTC said that plainly when Exxon said they were consulting with communities, and the reality was in the Maruca area, the reality was nothing of the kind. They said they consulted with X number of communities, 15 or 20 or something. And he who was from one of them said to me, not at all, that they all were invited to a meeting. They all had to find their own way out to this other village, not their own. And they were there. The people organizing the meeting, Exxon and others, spoke for 2 hours. And then there was like 20 minutes when they asked if there was any question or comment. And he said they never ever once came into any of the communities. And some of these communities, brother and sister that are here, are those communities that are in the front line should there have any oil spill. They never went to any. They just come out to one meeting and they just blah, blah, blah. So there is indeed, again, under the ESCAZU, in terms of the quality and the definition and the deepening and the process of consultations, it's really being honored entirely in the breach. So I just love the let's put gender on the agenda, all of the women based issues that Simone brought out, the action to access justice under the ESCAZU that was eloquently said by John Palmer. I think these are all excellent recommendations, CEO and Deputy Chair and Sister Commissioners, that we could certainly look at, and I would suggest at least get them into our report, our next report for the Parliament, and this time insist that some of what we are saying in our reports gets the attention of the Parliament. I see that I wanted to just say that Nicole Cole has something in the chat. Nicole, are you able to speak? Or should we read out your chat, or can you read it out? Is Nicole's? Yes, Nicole, can you share with us? She makes a point about mangrove forests. So Nicole, if you are still there, can you unmute? Are you able to unmute? Renate, if you could check on that.
And it looks like she's unable to unmute.
Yeah, she tried just now. So I will read it out on her behalf. So Nicole Cole, Commissioner Cole said, the mangrove forests are being removed in the name of development. How then can we say we're truly committed to fight climate change? So a succinct but on the point. So thanks for that. I see she's trying to unmute again. Renata, no, I don't think I see that she's muted again. I don't think it's working. But thanks, Commissioner Cole, for that, and spot on, absolutely spot on. I just want to share with our commissioners, what well, we know ExxonMobil is one of the biggest oil companies, and that, but yes, and they know how to drill oil. And it seems they only have to look at our ocean and oil springs up. But they are also one of the oil companies in the whole wide world that has the worst ever reputation. The Exxon Valdez oil spill was so massive right in our area in the Gulf of Mexico. And it is still having enormous impacts on people and on the environment and on women. And so we can't ever, we mustn't brush these things under the carpet, that we have a classic offender. And I love the fact that, that the state of New Jersey in the USA has decided to take ExxonMobil and I think 5 other oil companies to court. And the issue is climate change, that for years and years and years, these companies in ExxonMobil paid persons to bury the science about climate change for decades. That has now been exposed. And the New Jersey state is bringing this to the fore and saying why. Because New Jersey, which is on the shore, has been one of the most badly affected states in the USA in terms of Storm Sandy devastated parts of New Jersey. They're still recovering from it. They know there are going to be more and more of these climate related disasters. And they're saying, New Jersey, to their credit, that they want redress in the court. And one of the remedies that they're recommending is that these companies, Exxon and others, pay forward massive monies, billions of dollars, to ensure that, since they're responsible for a lot of this climate change, that they pay the state of New Jersey for any cleaning up and any and so on and so on. So it's a beautiful case. I love it. It was just last week, I think, that this was done. And then you gotta like President Biden for saying a few months ago, Exxon made more money than God, And would they please pay their taxes? That's in the US of A, Exxon being a US company. We know they don't pay a single tax and nothing at all in Guyana. And I think, again, John and others, that, if New Jersey can do something like that, then, it gives us some encouragement here in Guyana and in the wider Caribbean, should we collaborate, to bring similar sorts of cases against these companies, because we have to hold them accountable. Absolutely, we have to. It's our duty under our Constitution. When I read out Article 25, it is our duty as citizens to promote and to protect our well-being and a healthy environment and so on. So, I believe we are duty bound to find ways to do this within our own rights. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more comments from anyone? Simone, I thought, and it's a good thing we're recording because Simone was on a roll, so I really like the points that she made. It certainly made it, the information or the impact or possible impact a lot more accessible to person. So we'll definitely use some song bites from that.
Renata, recommendation that with the recording, maybe we can ask our administrator Desiree to do to transcribe, and then with the transcription, some of us that are here on the call can look at it and roll it up into recommendations, recommendations for action, recommendations to take forward in our reports, recommendations for another public forum. We could have one of our outreach Zooms in which we put, as to quote Jocelyn, we put a gender on the oil agenda. And no doubt, this could also be true for the gold agenda. But yes, thank you.
Definitely. Okay. Any more questions? I'm wondering whether or not we should have a dialogue with the judiciary with respect to their abilities to.
In fact, Renata, I agree.
Clarity.
I think maybe our first port of call could be, we could invite Justice George, and maybe the Chancellor, and ask, as we're meeting with so many other persons in and out of government at the moment, and meet with them as a commission and raise some of these very issues on the call today concerning human rights and and the environment. And because as I hope I've been able to show, and we've said, we have very strong rights-based access to justice and the rest of it in our right in our hands as citizens of Guyana. And maybe bring some of these to her attention, and perhaps even offer or say, could there be a kind of a capacity building or some kind of forum for some of the judges where some of these matters can be brought to their attention? The judges only like to speak to judges, or other legal minds. We have Malini Aline, who is a leading human rights advocate and lawyer from Jamaica, who has been working with us in Guyana. And we also have, I would reach out and invite Justice Anderson himself and let him, as the big time judge, make some points to the rest of the Guyana judiciary, and maybe start the ball rolling with that under the aegis of the Chief Justice and Chancellor themselves, something like that. I'll write it out as another recommendation coming out of this.
Fantastic. I think it's a great idea. Um, so moving forward. Any final comments? If not, can we then proceed to bringing the session to a close? It's been a very enlightening session. I certainly learned a lot, and it's certainly given, I think, everyone some food for thought. And we certainly have a list of recommendations coming out from the comments made by you. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend today's session. I hope that you found it useful. And I hope certainly those who are learning about ESCAZU for the first time, to ensure that the information is disseminated amongst your networks. We've recorded the session, so I'll put it on the YouTube, and we can certainly invite persons to listen to the session again, because it'll be available. We'll take some of the recommendations forward, particularly the one with engaging the judiciary, and also to create a Bill of Rights, particularly for persons, for women, and particularly under this section of the environment, to basically try to uphold, ensure persons are aware of how they can, what rights and how they can uphold those rights. I want to thank you again.
Yes, and Renata, I am going to send the PowerPoint presentation and those questions and comments that I sort of left on the table in the last couple of slides for the commissioners, and to those who have joined us, friends. We will also send the PowerPoint as it is to you as well, and then of course the recording, and out of the recording we can probably get some good recommendations coming out from the dialogue.
Definitely.
So thank you very much indeed, and thanks Commission for organizing this little ESCAZU Plus session. Thanks.
It was a pleasure, and thank you again, everybody. So have a good evening, and please look out for the recording. It'll go on Zoom. Sorry, it'll go on the YouTube channel today. Cheers. Goodbye.